This is about the survival of the human race, a sign of the times, an analysis, and a commentary. Controlling population will reduce carbon. Remember the population explosion when population was growing at its fastest rate in human history in the decades after World War II. The sense that overpopulation was stunting economic development and stoking political instability took hold from New Delhi to the United Nations headquarters in New York, sending policymakers on an urgent quest to stop it. In the 1970s, the Indian government forcibly sterilized millions of women. Families in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and elsewhere were forced to have fewer children. In 1974, the United Nations organized its first World Population Conference to debate population control. China rolled out its one-child policy in 1980. Then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, the demographic crisis was supposedly over, as fertility rates in most of the world dropped to around the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman, with the one major exception of sub-Saharan Africa. Population specialists and politicians turned to other issues. By 1994, when the United Nations held its last population conference in Cairo, demographic targets had pretty much been abandoned, replaced by an agenda centered on empowering women, reducing infant mortality, and increasing access to reproductive health. Some people still regret that. Some applaud it, said the head of the Laboratory of Populations at Rockefeller University in New York. I'm not sure we need demographic goals, but we need forward thinking. Again, what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations? So now, concerns about population seem to be creeping back, as the threat of climate change has evolved from a fuzzy, faraway concept to one of the central existential threats to humanity. Scholars have noted that reducing the burning of fossil fuels might be easier if there were fewer of us consuming them. In other words, perhaps it's not just about how many people there are on this planet, but also about the environmental impact or footprint that they have. There are limits to the physical dimension. Overpopulation wouldn't be the whole story, but it could make a big difference. An article published in 2010 by researchers from the United States, Germany, and Austria concluded that if the world's population reached only 7.5 billion people by mid-century, rather than more than 9 billion in 2050, we would be spewing 5 billion to 9 billion fewer tons of carbon dioxide into the air. This alone would deliver 16 to 29% of the emission reductions needed over the next 4 decades to keep the global temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, above that of the late 19th century. The threshold scientists predict could lead to severe disruptions to the climate. Slower population growth could bring other benefits. The World Resources Institute has been looking into how the world would feed itself in 2050 without busting the carbon budget. On current demographic and economic projections, food production would have to increase 70% by 2050. Population growth is responsible for about 1/2 of increased food consumption. The other half comes from higher incomes and richer diets. Much of the expected population growth is set in stone, but sub-Saharan Africa, expected to add 1.2 billion people by 2050, on top of its current 900 million, is an exception. If fertility in sub-Saharan Africa slowed more rapidly than projected, declining to 2.1 children per woman in 2050 from 5.4 today, feeding the most undernourished region in the world would be a lot easier, and sparing African forests and woodlands from even greater deforestation would substantially reduce the amount of carbon entering the atmosphere. For all the benefits of slower population growth, population policies remain a highly touchy subject. In other words, This is not going to be easy to fix this problem. Population growth is only one factor, and not necessarily the most important one, contributing to global climate change. Over the course of the 20th century, emissions of carbon dioxide grew 180% faster than the population in poor countries, and 60% faster than the population in rich ones. Shifting the world economy into more sustainable energy sources and away from fossil fuels is still the most promising strategy. There is a strong case to be made that the world faces sustainability issues, whether it has 9 billion people, 7 billion people, or 4 billion people. Perhaps it really is a sustainability issue. There are limits to the physical dimension, and you can only have so many people living on planet Earth. And this too is another sign of the end of times, as we know them, transition days, which is a time of extraordinary changes, happenings, and events. Everything that must change rapidly or quickly, and for the better, because it really is about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. And that should be a very important question to ask. Revelation chapter 10. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. 2. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth. 3. And he cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. 4. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven, saying unto me, Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. 5. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven. 6. And swore by him that lives for ever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, but there should be time no longer. 7. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he has declared to his servants the prophets. It's time for the spiritual and physical manifestation of the book of Revelation. And these are more signs. And if it's not right, God will make it right.